Karen was known in her neighborhood for being a bit of a perfectionist. She took great pride in her home and the way it looked from the street. The flowers she planted were always in full bloom, and her lawn was manicured to near perfection. Karen believed that a well-kept neighborhood reflected the values of its residents. It was important to her that everything looked neat and tidy, not just for herself but for everyone who lived nearby. Every Saturday, Karen would walk around her block, assessing each house with a keen eye. She noticed when someone neglected their yard or when trash cans were left out too long. It wasn't that she meant to be rude, she simply felt that every little detail contributed to the overall beauty of the community. However, this need for order made her increasingly anxious about anything that seemed out of place. One day, while sipping coffee on her porch, Karen spotted something that made her heart race with frustration: a large camper van parked directly in front of her lawn. It wasn't just any camper, it was old and faded, and its presence felt like a giant boulder destroying the aesthetic she worked so hard to maintain. She couldn't understand why anyone would park such an eyesore in a place where it could easily be avoided. This moment ignited something within Karen, a determination to take action and restore the order she cherished in her neighborhood. Little did she know, this decision would lead to unexpected consequences. As Karen stared at the camper van parked outside her home, her frustration grew. The vehicle was an ugly sight that seemed to overshadow the beauty she worked so hard to maintain. The paint was peeling, revealing dull patches underneath, and the tires looked worn and flat. It had once been a vibrant shade of blue, but years of neglect had dulled it to a faded grayish hue. The camper was bulky and awkwardly shaped, protruding into the street and blocking part of her view. Its presence felt like an unwelcome guest at a party, distracting and out of place. While other homes on the block boasted charming front porches with swings and well-kept gardens, this camper stood as a glaring contrast. To Karen, it wasn't just an eyesore, it threatened to ruin the inviting atmosphere of their neighborhood. Every time she glanced out her window or stepped onto her porch, she was reminded of this unsightly vehicle. What made matters worse was that it blocked her view of the lovely oak tree across the street that provided shade and beauty throughout the seasons. She considered how visitors might perceive their neighborhood when they saw this dilapidated camper, wondering if they would think less of her home because of it. Karen's mind raced as she imagined all the ways this camper could tarnish their community's reputation. Determined to protect her neighborhood's charm, she felt compelled to take action against what she viewed as a growing threat to their way of life. Determined to restore what she saw as the neighborhood's charm, Karen took a deep breath and decided to reach out to the Homeowners Association, HOA. She believed it was her duty to protect the community and uphold its standards of aesthetics. With her mind racing, she carefully composed a formal complaint detailing her concerns about the camper van parked in front of her lawn. In her letter, she emphasized how the dilapidated vehicle violated the community's guidelines on maintaining appearances. As she prepared the letter, Karen felt a sense of purpose. She envisioned her neatly trimmed hedges and colorful flower beds returning to their rightful prominence without the distraction of that unwanted camper. With confidence, she mailed the complaint, convinced that the HOA would quickly address the issue. Surely, they would share her concern about the reputation of their neighborhood. After all, that's what she believed the HOA was there for. After waiting a few days, Karen's anticipation grew as she wondered how the association would respond. In her mind, she pictured an HOA meeting where they would discuss her complaint and take swift action against the camper. However, as she eagerly awaited news, seeds of doubt crept into her thoughts. Would the HOA truly support her cause? Or would they dismiss her concerns as trivial? Regardless, Karen was resolute. She would stand up for her vision of perfection in their community, no matter what it took. A few days after mailing her complaint, Karen received a response from the Homeowners Association. She tore open the envelope with eager anticipation, hoping for positive news. Inside, she found a neatly typed letter assuring her that they had received her concerns about the camper van and would look into the situation further. The letter expressed appreciation for her vigilance in maintaining the neighborhood standards and promised that they would send someone to investigate. Feeling a rush of relief, Karen imagined how wonderful it would be to see the camper finally removed. She pictured her lawn restored to its former glory, free from the eyesore that had plagued her view for so long. The HOA's quick response made her feel validated. After all, she believed she was fighting for a cause that benefited everyone in the community. However, as the days passed, she noticed that no one from the HOA had come to speak with her. She began to wonder if they were truly taking her complaint seriously or if it was just a polite acknowledgement meant to ease her worries. Doubts crept back into her mind as she thought about how easy it could be for them to dismiss her concerns. Still, Karen chose to remain hopeful. She decided to attend the next HOA meeting, where she could express her concerns in person and perhaps gather support from other neighbors who might share her views. With determination in her heart, she prepared to advocate for what she believed was best for their community. As the days turned into weeks, Karen's frustration with the camper van intensified. It seemed to appear as if by clockwork, parked directly in front of her lawn on multiple occasions. Each time she stepped outside, her heart sank at the sight of that bulky, faded vehicle obstructing her view. The once vibrant garden she worked hard to cultivate felt overshadowed by the eyesore. The brilliant colors of her flowers, which she nurtured with care, now seemed dull against the backdrop of the old camper. Whenever guests came over or neighbors passed by, Karen worried that they would focus more on the van than on her beautiful home. With each sighting of the camper, her feelings of irritation grew. It wasn't just about aesthetics anymore, it was also about how it made her feel in her own space. She longed for peaceful mornings on her porch with a cup of coffee and a view of the lovely oak tree across the street. Instead, she was met with an unwelcome reminder of what she considered neglect. Karen often found herself pacing her front yard, searching for ways to cope with the growing sense of unease. Even during moments when she tried to enjoy her garden or relax on her porch, thoughts about the van consumed her mind. She couldn't shake off the feeling that she needed to do something drastic if she ever hoped to reclaim her enjoyment of home and neighborhood. The pressure mounted as both time and patience wore thin, making Karen more determined than ever to find a resolution before she lost control over her own sanctuary. As Karen prepared for the upcoming HOA meeting, a neighbor casually mentioned something that left her stunned. "You do know the street in front of your house is public, right?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Karen's heart raced as she tried to process his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, feeling a mix of confusion and dread. Her neighbor explained that because the road was public, there were no parking restrictions. This meant that her neighbor had every right to park the camper van wherever they pleased, including directly in front of her lawn. The realization hit Karen like a cold wave. She had been so focused on her complaint and her vision of a perfect neighborhood that she hadn't considered the legality of the situation. Karen felt a rush of emotions, frustration at her own oversight, anger at the continued presence of the van, and helplessness about how to address it now that she understood her neighbor's rights. All this time, she had believed she was fighting for community standards, but now it felt like she was battling against something far more complicated than aesthetics. With this new understanding weighing heavily on her shoulders, Karen contemplated her next steps. She knew she would have to adjust her approach when discussing the issue with the HOA. Instead of simply focusing on aesthetics, she needed to consider how to coexist with this reality while still advocating for what made their neighborhood feel like home. The challenge ahead felt daunting, but Karen was determined not to give up just yet. Despite the new information regarding the public street, Karen's frustration was far from dissipating. Determined to find a solution, she resolved to call the police and report what she believed was illegal parking. Surely, they would understand her concerns and help her in getting the camper removed. With a mix of hope and anxiety, she dialed the local police department, her hands shaking slightly as she waited for someone to answer. After explaining her situation, the dispatcher assured her that an officer would be sent out to check on the van. Karen felt a surge of optimism as she hung up the phone. Maybe this time there would be a way to resolve her ongoing battle with the camper. She imagined how wonderful it would feel to finally reclaim her view and restore order to her neighborhood. When the officer arrived, Karen rushed outside to greet him, eager to explain everything. She pointed out the faded camper parked squarely in front of her lawn and shared her worries about its impact on property values and community aesthetics. However, As she detailed her concerns, the officer listened patiently but appeared unfazed by her passionate pleas. "Public street, ma'am," he finally said with a shrug. "There's nothing we can do." His dismissal left Karen feeling deflated. All that effort seemed wasted in an instant. As he walked back to his car, Karen stood there speechless, grappling with a sense of defeat that threatened to overshadow any remnants of hope she had left. As the officer approached, Karen felt a flutter of hope mixed with anxiety. This was her chance to finally get some support in dealing with the camper van that had become a constant source of frustration. She greeted him and quickly began explaining her situation, articulating her worries about how the van was ruining the aesthetic of her neighborhood and diminishing property values. The officer listened attentively, nodding at the appropriate moments as she talked about the faded paint and how it blocked her view. Karen poured her heart into her explanation, truly believing that if he understood just how much this inconvenience affected her life, he would see the urgency in her plea. However, after a few moments of consideration, the officer turned to her with a calm expression. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I understand your concerns, but this is a public street. There are no parking restrictions here. I can't do anything about it." His words struck Karen like a thunderclap, leaving her momentarily speechless. She felt a wave of disappointment wash over her as she realized that all her efforts to fight against the camper were futile under the current circumstances. The officer offered a sympathetic smile before turning away, leaving Karen standing there in disbelief. The optimism she had felt just moments earlier evaporated in an instant. Instead, melancholy settled in as she watched him walk back to his car. With no immediate solution in sight, she felt increasingly trapped in a situation that seemed impossible to change. Her dreams of a perfect neighborhood now felt more distant than ever, deepening her resolve to find another way to address the issue at hand. As the officer walked away, Karen was left standing in front of her home, overwhelmed by a mix of frustration and disappointment. She had hoped for a resolution, yet now she felt foolish for having called the police in the first place. The realization that she had overstepped by involving law enforcement in what was essentially a neighborhood dispute weighed heavily on her. Karen began to question her judgment. Had she taken things too far in her quest for perfection? The camper van was not illegal, it was merely an eyesore in her eyes. Deep down, she wondered if her actions might have alienated her neighbors rather than fostered a sense of community. Perhaps they viewed her as the difficult homeowner, the one who couldn't tolerate even a minor inconvenience. As she walked back inside, Karen reflected on how her pursuit of an idyllic neighborhood had led to this moment of defeat. She felt like she was fighting not just against a parked camper, but also against her own rising anxiety and frustration over losing control of her environment. It seemed that every effort she made to assert her ideals was met with resistance. With a heavy heart, Karen sank into a chair and stared at the wall, feeling trapped in a situation that was beyond her control. While she still cherished her vision of beauty and order, she now realized that part of living in a community meant accepting imperfections. As night fell, Karen knew she had to rethink her strategy. Finding peace wouldn't just be about removing the van but also about finding harmony within herself and with those around her. As Karen reflected on her recent experiences, she began to understand the deeper reasons behind her obsession with appearances. It was not just about maintaining the beauty of her property, it was also tied to her desire for control in her life. Growing up, she had always admired tidy neighborhoods and well-kept gardens, believing that they signified respect for oneself and for others. For Karen, a perfectly manicured lawn was synonymous with success and stability. However, her relentless focus on outward appearances often came at a cost. She realized that her insistence on perfection could create distance between herself and her neighbors. Instead of fostering connections, her need for control sometimes alienated those around her. Where there could have been community gatherings and shared laughter, there were instead tense interactions marked by her criticisms and complaints. Karen's firefight against the camper van was a manifestation of this struggle. While she believed she was standing up for neighborhood standards, she was unknowingly building walls around herself, walls that obscured the very sense of belonging she sought to cultivate. Her neighbor who parked the van wasn't an enemy but a fellow resident with his own life and challenges. Understanding this dynamic, Karen knew that to strengthen her relationships with her neighbors, she would need to shift her perspective. Rather than viewing imperfections as threats to her vision of a perfect neighborhood, she could embrace them as part of life's beautiful messiness. This realization marked the beginning of a new chapter for Karen, one where empathy and connection might take center stage over her pursuit of perfection. After the police visit, Karen sat in her living room, pondering her recent actions. The weight of her decisions pressed on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that calling the police was an overreaction. As she gazed out the window at the camper van parked outside, she began to question whether her frustrations were truly justified. Karen recalled how she had felt compelled to fight for what she believed was right for her neighborhood. Yet now, faced with the reality of a public street and the officer's indifferent response, she wondered if her standards were too high and whether she had misjudged the situation. Had her desire for control led her to act in ways that felt unreasonable? The thought of alienating her neighbors haunted her. Instead of building connections, she realized that her quest for perfection had created barriers. Perhaps the camper wasn't just an eyesore, it represented something more significant, her struggle to accept life's unpredictability and imperfections. As night fell and the street lights flickered on, Karen felt a mix of regret and clarity. She knew that while maintaining her property was important to her, fostering relationships within her community held equal weight. In that moment of reflection, she recognized that accepting differences could lead to greater harmony in her life. Karen resolved to approach future interactions with more understanding and openness. Rather than viewing imperfections as obstacles, she would strive to embrace them as part of life's rich tapestry. This shift in mindset could transform not only her perspective but also how she connected with those around her. In the end, Karen's journey through frustration and self-reflection highlighted a vital lesson about community living. She concluded that while personal standards of aesthetics and order are important, understanding the shared rules and norms of a neighborhood is equally crucial. The experience with the camper van served as a reminder that each resident within a community has their own life, preferences, and challenges. Karen learned to value her neighbors' differences instead of viewing them as disturbances. Building relationships based on respect and understanding was essential for cultivating a sense of belonging in her neighborhood. Recognizing that everyone has their own definition of what makes a home beautiful could lead to more meaningful connections rather than conflicts over appearances. She now understood the importance of patience and open communication. Encouraging dialogue among neighbors could foster a collaborative spirit, allowing them to collectively improve their surroundings while embracing life's imperfections. It wasn't just about maintaining a perfect lawn or an immaculate street, it was about creating an environment where everyone felt welcomed and appreciated. With this newfound perspective, Karen felt ready to engage her neighbors more positively. Whether it was initiating friendly conversations about gardening tips or organizing community cleanups, she embraced the idea of contributing to her neighborhood's unique charm rather than critiquing it. Ultimately, by being considerate of others and understanding community rules, Karen embarked on a path toward not only enhancing her home but also enriching her relationships with those who shared her space.